Do you feel free? Free to choose, to think, to be who you are? That's what we all want to believe, that we're in control of ourselves, that we're the ones choosing our own paths. But what if I told you that this feeling of freedom might just be a well-designed illusion? That behind every decision you make, there could be 1,000 invisible strings, social, psychological, biological, pulling you without you even noticing? What if the self making the choice doesn't even exist in the way you think it does? Over the centuries, some of the world's greatest minds, from Sartre to Foucault, Buddha to Nietzsche, Kant to Jung, have left behind ideas that brutally challenge our common sense, ideas that go way beyond academic philosophy. They strike at the very core of what it means to live, act, want, and exist. Some said we're only free when we give up the ego. Others believed we're condemned to freedom and to the unbearable anxiety that comes with it. And some argued that freedom itself is just another tool of control, a trick built into the larger game of power. Today, I invite you to step into that abyss, not to find easy answers, but to question the comfortable truths that hold up your daily life. These are 30 disturbing philosophical ideas about freedom. And fair warning, after this video, you may never look at yourself the same way again. The idea that we're free to make choices is one of the pillars of modern culture. We hear things like, follow your heart, be yourself, you can be anything you want, as if desire comes from a pure, authentic place deep within us. But Arthur Schopenhauer shatters that illusion with a single sentence. A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. That distinction changes everything, because it leads to an uncomfortable truth. We don't choose our own desires. When you feel drawn to something, falling in love, quitting your job, chasing a dream, seeking revenge, proving yourself, you think you're in control. But in reality, the desire just appeared. You didn't plan it. You didn't create it. It simply rose up, and you followed it. Schopenhauer says that while we might act according to our will, we don't control where that will comes from. It moves through us like a mysterious force, older than reason, deeper than the conscious self we believe we are. That means our actions, no matter how rational they seem, always begin in a place we don't control. They spring from what Schopenhauer calls the will, a blind, irrational, restless force that drives everything in existence. And this will isn't just human. It's the core of all reality. It pushes trees to grow, animals to survive, humans to conquer, desire, dominate. Everything is will, but in humans the will becomes tragic because we're conscious of it. We realize that we desire, and yet we can't stop desiring. Worse, every time we satisfy one desire, another shows up, and another, and another. We're trapped in a cycle of endless craving. We want, we chase, we get, and we're still not satisfied, like a thirst that's never fully quenched. According to Schopenhauer, life swings between two states: the pain of wanting what we don't have, the emptiness of getting what we wanted, and not knowing what's next. He says the human condition is marked by a kind of essential restlessness, a deep unease that comes from being driven by the will, yet too self-aware to live in peace with it. And the most disturbing part, you can't fully control this will. No matter how much you study, meditate, or discipline yourself, you don't choose what you desire. You don't will your will, you just feel it and respond. That's why Schopenhauer didn't believe in free will. To him, free will is an illusion, created by our rational mind, which shows up too late. By the time we decide, we've already been moved by desire. Now we're just justifying it. Picture someone choosing to become a lawyer. They might say they thought it through, weighed the pros and cons, made a logical decision. But Schopenhauer would say, that's just the surface. The real choice was already made by hidden impulses. the need for approval, fear of failure, a craving for success, or even childhood trauma. In this view, reason isn't the captain of the ship. It's the lawyer of desire, explaining choices that were already made in the dark. So, are we hopelessly trapped? Schopenhauer believed we can't achieve total freedom, but we can weaken the will's grip on us, not by force, but by understanding, by seeing the game for what it is. And that clarity, in itself, is a form of freedom. He suggested two possible paths that give us relief. Art, when we lose ourselves in beauty, music, painting, poetry. We disconnect from the will for a moment. We stop wanting, chasing, grasping. We just observe. Art lifts us out of the endless wanting cycle. It doesn't give us power, but it gives us peace. Compassion. When we realize that everyone around us is also trapped by the will, also suffering, also craving, we begin to feel deep empathy. Compassion isn't just a moral feeling. It's an existential response to shared pain. When we suffer with others, the ego's hold begins to loosen. These two paths don't free us completely, but they give us glimpses of peace. Moments where we live with less anxiety, less obsession, less attachment. Schopenhauer's ideas would later inspire Freud and the birth of psychoanalysis. Long before Freud, Schopenhauer sensed that we're moved by unconscious forces we don't control, but that shape most of what we do. Unlike optimistic thinkers, Schopenhauer didn't believe reason could save us. For him, lucidity is the best we can achieve, to be honest about our prison, to see it clearly, and maybe, through that clarity, live with a little more ease and less illusion. So, do you feel like you control your desires, or that they control you? Have you ever found yourself chasing something and suddenly realized you didn't even know why? Let us know in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, and subscribe to support this channel. Schopenhauer doesn't reject life. He invites us to radical awareness. Because only when we see the prison can we begin to find small ways out. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that human freedom isn't a gift, it's a burden. When he said we are condemned to be free, he wasn't being poetic. He was describing what it means to be human. According to Sartre, there is no fixed human nature. We're not born with a purpose, a divine plan, or a pre-written script for our lives. Unlike what philosophers like Aristotle or Aquinas believed, there is no built-in essence to human beings. For Sartre, existence comes before essence. That means we are thrown into the world without asking for it, without knowing why, and only afterward do we create who we are through our choices. You exist. Now what? Now you're responsible. There's no outside force, divine, biological, or social, that can fully determine your path. Even when you say, I had no choice, you're still choosing not to choose. That's the real curse. Freedom is inescapable. But this freedom isn't light. It's heavy. It brings anxiety, fear, even despair. Because if nothing is determined, then everything is up to you. You're the author of your life, and there's no getting out of it. Even when you try to hide behind rules, traditions, or authority figures, Sartre calls that bad faith, mauvaise foi. It's pretending you're not free. It's lying to yourself to avoid the weight of your own choices. Take someone who stays in a job they hate and says, I have no other option. Sartre would disagree. You can quit, you can move, you can choose a different life, but you're avoiding the consequences of those choices, so you pretend they don't exist. Bad faith is self-deception. It's living like an object, not a subject. Like a gear in a machine, not a free person. This is where existential anxiety comes in. Sartre compares it to standing at the edge of a cliff. You don't just fear falling, you realize you could jump. Nothing is stopping you. That's the vertigo of freedom. It's the shock of knowing there are no rails, no blueprint, just decisions. And here's the twist, that anxiety isn't a weakness. It's proof you understand your freedom. It means you're awake to the truth. that your actions define you, not your background, not your beliefs, not your labels. Sartre takes it even further. When you choose, you're not just choosing for yourself. You're making a statement about what kind of life is worth living. Each action becomes a kind of blueprint for humanity. You're saying, this is how a human being should act in this situation. So every decision is not just personal, it's a creation of values. That's how deep Sartre's ethics go, not based on outside rules, but on radical responsibility. To be ethical, for Sartre, is to own your freedom, to recognize that you're always choosing, and to act consciously, honestly, and fully aware of the consequences. It's not about perfection, it's about authorship, about not blaming others for your life, about not outsourcing your identity, and yes, that's scary, because it means you have no excuses. You're responsible not just for what you do, but also for what you don't. But Sartre's philosophy isn't a call to despair, it's a wake-up call. He doesn't want you to be afraid of freedom. He wants you to wake up to it, to stop living on autopilot, to stop copying others, to start living authentically, accepting the risk and the beauty of being truly free. For Sartre, freedom doesn't mean doing whatever you want. It means owning the fact that you're always choosing, even when you stay silent, even when you freeze. You build your identity through action, not inheritance, not labels, not blind tradition. So here's the real question. Are you living as a subject or an object? Are you taking action or just reacting? Are you choosing or hiding behind excuses? Yes, freedom is terrifying, but it's also real freedom. Because once you realize you're in charge, you stop playing roles that were handed to you and start creating your own meaning. And that's what it means to be human. Nietzsche believed that human beings, as we know them today, are not finished. We're just a bridge, a transition, a rough draft of what we could be. And what's holding us back isn't chains or laws. It's something more subtle and powerful, inherited values. From a young age, we're taught what's good, bad, right, wrong, worthy, sinful. These words are handed to us before we can even think about them. And without realizing it, we start living by a moral system we never chose. We just follow. For Nietzsche, that's not freedom. That's blind submission. It's living by rules created by others, often by people who weren't interested in our well-being, but in our control. That's why he says true freedom only begins when we tear down these imposed moral systems. But this isn't a call for chaos or meaningless rebellion. It's about realizing that living under second-hand values isn't living authentically. Nietzsche harshly criticizes what he calls herd morality, a system that praises obedience, humility, sacrifice, and submission. A system that teaches us that wanting too much is sinful, that standing out is dangerous, and that owning your power is arrogance. To Nietzsche, this morality was invented by the weak to tame the strong. It flipped the script, turned strength, vitality, courage, and the will to thrive into vices, and turned resentment, fear, and envy into moral virtues. But Nietzsche isn't saying we should live without morals. He's saying we should create our own. That we should be able to say, this is good because I made it good. That we stop following pre-made values and instead have the guts to become value creators. This is the essence of what he calls the free spirit, the one who dares to think for themselves, who questions what's accepted, and who chooses solitude in thought over the comfort of the crowd. But this freedom comes with a cost. It demands breaking away, having courage, and enduring some suffering. Because creating your own values isn't just declaring new rules, it's living by them. And that means dealing with the consequences, even if the whole world turns against you. Nietzsche knew this path wasn't for everyone. Most people can't handle the weight of thinking for themselves. They prefer the comfort of being told what to do. But he believed that a few, the bold ones, would choose to go further, and they would be truly free. He called this kind of person the Übermensch, or overman, not a superhero, but someone who transcends inherited values and becomes the author of their own life. Someone who says yes to life, with all it includes: pain, joy, chaos, creation, destruction, and rebirth. To be free, for Nietzsche, doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means taking responsibility for becoming who you are. It means having the courage to drop the cultural, religious, and moral crutches and build your own foundation to walk on. And that's terrifying, because once you reject inherited values, you're on your own. No more maps, no more guarantees, no ready-made salvation. You become your own project, your own unfinished masterpiece. Nietzsche compared this to walking a tightrope over an abyss. Humanity is stuck in the middle. On one side is the animal, pure instinct, no self-awareness. On the other is the Übermensch, the one who gives life its own meaning. And freedom is this terrifying walk, uncertain, risky, with no safety net. But why make this crossing? Because according to Nietzsche, life is only worth living when it's lived with intensity. When we stop numbing ourselves with empty promises of eternal rewards and start creating beauty, strength, and meaning right here, right now. There is no other life waiting for us, no cosmic judge. There is only life. And life asks us to be creators, not servants. Nietzsche knew that not everyone could handle this view. Many would cling to comforting illusions. Heaven as a reward, hell as punishment, obedience as virtue. But he also knew that for those willing to take the risk, there's a kind of freedom that no external system can ever offer, the freedom to be the author of your own destiny. So what about you? Are you ready to create your own values? Have you ever felt trapped by expectations, rules, or beliefs that weren't truly yours? Have you ever noticed you were living to please, to follow, or to fit in, instead of becoming who you really are? Freedom for Nietzsche isn't something granted, it's something earned. And it begins the moment we dare to tear down the moral walls we've inherited and start building within ourselves the foundation of our own truth. For Immanuel Kant, being free doesn't mean doing whatever you want. It doesn't mean giving in to impulses, desires, or emotions. In fact, according to him, that's the opposite of freedom. It's being a slave to inner forces you didn't choose. Wanting something doesn't make you free. It just means you're being pulled along. For Kant, true freedom comes from acting according to reason. More specifically, from acting based on moral principles that you recognize through reason as being universally valid. That's what he means by autonomy. Not I do whatever I want, but something deeper. I can give myself rules, and not just any rules, but ones that would make sense for all rational beings to follow. This is the heart of Kant's moral philosophy. When you act morally, you're not just following a rule someone else gave you. You're using your own reason to recognize a principle that applies to everyone. And you choose to follow it not out of self-interest, but because it's the rational thing to do. Take truthfulness, for example. Telling the truth isn't right because God said so, or because you'll get rewarded. It's right because if everyone lied, the concept of truth itself would collapse. Lying couldn't be a universal law, so it must be rejected. That's why you don't lie, because reason shows it's a contradiction. And here's where Kant's idea becomes challenging. Freedom isn't doing what you feel like. Freedom is acting out of duty, and acting out of duty means obeying reason. This goes against almost everything we now associate with freedom, because for Kant, the more you act on your impulses or personal desires, the less free you are. You're being driven, not thinking, but when you resist an impulse, when you go against what you want in the moment, and instead do what's right because you understand it's a principle everyone should follow, that's when you are truly free. It's a powerful paradox. To be free is to obey reason. To be free is to submit to moral laws that you, as a rational being, recognize and choose. That's why Kant says, a free will is a moral will. Freedom isn't about having no rules. It's about self-legislation. But this raises an uncomfortable question. Is this rational autonomy just a new kind of prison? If being free means suppressing your feelings and coldly following reason, where's the space for spontaneity, for emotion, for being fully human? That's what many critics have asked. Did Kant, by making reason the ruler of morality, create such a strict model of the self that it almost becomes a form of self-denial? Even Nietzsche, who we discussed in the previous chapter, argued that Kant's ethics are like a golden cage. You feel virtuous while suffocating what's most alive in you. To Nietzsche, Kant's morality is one of denial, a cold virtue with no passion, no body, no laughter. But Kant would reply, yes, it may be hard, but that's where human dignity lies. Freedom isn't about chasing pleasure. It's about a responsibility. It's about respecting others, not because it's useful, but because they are ends in themselves. In Kant's view, no human being should ever be treated as a tool or a means to an end. That idea is the core of his ethics. If you act in a way that respects that dignity, in yourself and in others, you are acting as a morally free person. And this view has political consequences too. For Kant, a just society is one that allows every individual to make moral decisions for themselves without being manipulated by others' desires, economic interests, or religious authority. A truly free society isn't just about doing whatever you want. It's about respecting everyone's rational autonomy. But this kind of freedom takes maturity. It takes courage. The courage to think for yourself, without guidance, without dogmas, without emotional crutches. This is what Kant called the exit from immaturity. And by immaturity, he didn't mean age. He meant mental dependence. He believed that humanity must dare to think for itself. Sapere aude, dare to know. So, what about you? Are you being guided by reason or by automatic desires? Do you make decisions based on principles or just go with your mood? Do you think freedom means doing what you want or following what you know is right, even when it's hard? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this chapter gave you something to think about, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who thinks freedom just means doing whatever you want. Because for Kant, freedom isn't comfortable, it's noble. It's the freedom to be dignified, to live as someone who recognizes and respects humanity, in themselves and in others, as an end, never a means. Baruch Spinoza saw the universe like a perfectly synchronized machine, where everything, absolutely everything, is connected, determined, and dependent on everything else. In his view, there's no such thing as randomness, or free will, or choices that float in a vacuum. Everything that happens for a reason, a cause, a logical, unavoidable chain of events. And in this world of absolute causality, Spinoza saw the idea of free will as a comforting illusion, but a false one. He famously said, "Man believes himself to be free, simply because he is conscious of his actions and unaware of the causes that determine them." That's it. What most people call freedom is really not knowing why they do what they do. Let's say you decide to eat healthy. You might think, I made that choice. But did you? What about how you were raised? Fear of getting sick, a childhood memory, a video you watched, a trend you absorbed. Every choice is actually part of a bigger chain of causes you may not be aware of. For Spinoza, everything in the universe, including our minds, follows the same natural laws as planets, trees, or weather. You think, feel, and act because something led you there. There's always a cause. And this leads to his most radical idea. Real freedom doesn't mean acting without cause. That would be nonsense. Real freedom means understanding the causes. The moment you start seeing the strings behind your actions, when you stop imagining yourself as a free-floating soul and start seeing yourself as part of a bigger system, you become freer, because now you're no longer fooling yourself. Spinoza didn't want us to become passive or robotic. He wanted us to become wise, and a wise person, in his view, is someone who accepts that everything is the way it is for a reason. And instead of fighting reality, they try to understand it. And in that understanding, they find peace. But let's be clear that peace isn't laziness. It's not giving up. It's clarity. Because when you act believing you're the master of your will, you're often just being pushed around by forces you don't understand. But when you investigate those forces, when you start recognizing what drives you, you begin to see clearly. And with that clarity, you make better decisions, not because you're completely free, but because you now understand what's guiding you. This is where Spinoza says that freedom is understanding necessity. You're not free despite being determined. You're free because you understand how you're determined. Picture someone feeling intense anger. They think it just happened, like they chose to be mad. But if they look deeper, they'll see the anger came from a thought, which came from an expectation, which was tied to a past experience, which came from fear, which was shaped by years of repetition. Once they see that, something shifts. They may not be able to not feel angry, but they can act differently, because now they understand where it came from. And understanding changes everything. That's why Spinoza offers a rational ethics, a path of self-knowledge built on understanding the structure of the world and the structure of our own mind, like learning how a complex machine works, slowly, patiently, until we can handle it wisely. In this sense, freedom is like progressive enlightenment. The more you understand why you desire something, why you're afraid, why you repeat patterns, why you suffer, the less you're dragged around by those forces. But this process requires letting go of the fantasy that you're a sovereign self, completely separate from the world. Letting go of the belief that you're in control just because you want to be. Letting go of the pride that says, I am the cause of myself, like some kind of little god. To Spinoza, all of that is illusion. And freedom begins when those illusions fall away. So, if everything's determined, why should we act ethically? Why do good? Because for Spinoza, living according to reason is living according to the divine nature of the universe. Reason leads us to something he called conatus, the inner drive to keep existing and grow stronger in who we are. To act well means to act in ways that expand that power, in ourselves and in others. To live with greater clarity, harmony, and connection. To Spinoza, evil isn't a mystery. It's just whatever shrinks our power to live. Good is what expands us, what connects, strengthens, and enlightens. That's why he said, a free mind thinks about life, not death. The wise person doesn't obsess over pain or rewards. They try to understand life and act from that clarity. And you, do you feel like you act from free will? Or are you starting to see the hidden causes behind your choices? Have you ever had a moment of clarity when you realized something you thought was a choice was actually shaped by unconscious patterns? For Spinoza, freedom isn't breaking nature's laws. It's understanding that you are nature. And the more deeply you understand that, the more clearly, peacefully, and truthfully you can live. David Hume didn't try to destroy our beliefs out of cruelty, but out of honesty. He believed that if we take a close look inside ourselves, the thing we call self starts to fall apart. There's no solid, permanent core. No inner observer running the show. What we find, according to him, is just a constant stream of perceptions, sensations, thoughts, and emotions. Hume compared it to a theatre, but a theatre with no actor. The mind is nothing but a bundle of perceptions in motion. So if there's no fixed lasting self, then who chooses? Who decides? Who is the subject behind the action? That's where the common idea of freedom starts to break down. When we say, I chose this, we're assuming there's a central I that observes, weighs options, and makes decisions. But Hume believed That's an illusion, a story. We tell after the fact. We're not the storyteller, we're the story itself. We are the flow, not the observer. There is no solid who behind it. There's only what is happening, and the constant movement of that happening. This is a deeply unsettling idea. It shakes the ground of personal identity. If I'm not a stable essence, if I'm just a passing collection of experiences, then what am I? And more importantly, can I even be held responsible for my actions if there's no stable me making choices? Hume wasn't saying we don't exist. He was saying we exist as a process, not as a fixed thing. The self is like a river, always moving, never the same from one moment to the next. Yet, we keep calling that flowing thing me. And this directly challenges the idea of free will, because if there's no stable identity choosing, then what we call choice is just another mental event, shaped by past experiences, emotional triggers, habits, and associations. You didn't choose with true freedom. You were carried by a chain of momentary impressions, which gave you the feeling of making a choice. Let's say someone decides to end a relationship. They might say, "This was a deep decision from my true self." But Hume would say, what actually happened was a stream of feelings, thoughts, memories, maybe a specific conversation, an old trigger, emotional fatigue. All of that came together and produced the impulse to leave. The idea that a consistent self made that choice is just a comforting summary. And why is it comforting? Because the belief in a stable self gives us structure. It helps us build stories. It allows for responsibility, pride, guilt, continuity. Without it, everything feels unstable. But Hume warns us that stability is fiction. It's a product of memory and language. We glue together fragments of experience and call it a timeline. Does that mean we're completely lost at sea? Not really. Hume says that even without a fixed self, we can still build habits, learn, and make consistent judgments. But all of that happens within the stream, not from a separate soul steering the ship. So, in Hume's view, freedom isn't a power from within a sovereign I. It's just a word we use when our perceptions line up in a way that feels coherent. But that coherence is always fragile, always temporary. What we call a decision is more like a self-organizing moment inside the bundle of perceptions, not the conscious act of a separate chooser. This idea anticipated many modern movements in psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy of mind. Today, we know that our sense of self is shaped by neural circuits, sensory memories, emotional responses, and the decision maker inside us is really a product of the very system it's trying to control. The mind isn't the conductor, it's the entire orchestra in motion. So, how do we live without the illusion of a self? How do we love, take responsibility, act ethically? Hume doesn't give a desperate answer. Instead, he offers a kind of existential humility. When we accept that there's no fixed me, we become more open to empathy. We realize that others are also in motion, also unfinished stories, also just bundles of experiences trying to make sense of life. And that realization creates room for compassion, for understanding, and for forgiveness. Hume also reminds us that morality doesn't come from pure reason. It comes from emotional experience. It's not a rational I choosing between good and evil. It's the feeling that arises when we witness suffering, injustice, or kindness. So even without a solid self, ethics is still possible because we feel, because we react, because we're affected. And those emotional connections are the thread that holds us all together, even if we're all just floating bundles of perception. Have you ever felt like there's a deep, consistent you? Or have you had moments where you realized you were just reacting to impulses in the moment? Do you think it's possible to live ethically, even if there's no stable, fixed self calling the shots? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know how this one hit you. And if this chapter gave you a new perspective on who you are, give it a like, subscribe, and share with someone who still believes there's a solid me in control of everything. Hume's philosophy is an invitation to let go of the ego, not to disappear, but to free ourselves from the illusion of control. And maybe, just maybe, open up to a more honest way of being, less centered, more connected and more alive. Søren Kierkegaard didn't see freedom as something light or easy. For him, freedom is an abyss, a wide open space full of possibilities and full of anxiety. To be free, Kierkegaard said, isn't peaceful, it's dizzying, it's standing, on the edge of infinite choices and feeling the weight of having to decide, with no guarantees, no manual, no outside truth to guide you. He wrote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of possibility. It's like standing on the edge of a cliff. You could jump or not. There's nothing forcing you either way. And it's that very lack of force that terrifies you." According to Kierkegaard, this is the root of anxiety, the recognition of our own freedom. The realization that yes, you can choose, but your choices define you. And once made, they cancel out every other possibility. That awareness can feel paralyzing. That's why he uses the word dizziness. It's not the fear of falling. It's the fear of knowing you could jump. It's the panic of true freedom. So anxiety isn't a flaw. It's a sign that you're truly awake, that you understand what it means to be a free, responsible human being, thrown into the unknown. And this kind of freedom isn't theoretical. It's existential. You can choose to love, to betray, to forgive, to run away. But every choice comes with a loss, a sacrifice, a kind of loneliness, because no one can choose for you, and no choice comes with a guaranteed right answer. Kierkegaard saw life as an inner drama, a quiet stage where each of us struggles to find meaning in the middle of endless possibilities. And for him, that struggle is deeply spiritual. Freedom isn't just a philosophical concept, it's a matter of the soul, and what's at stake is what he called becoming yourself. Not who others want you to be, not who society expects, but who you truly are. But becoming yourself is hard, because sooner or later, you'll meet despair. And Kierkegaard said, that despair is the natural state of anyone who's trying to run from their real self. He described two types of despair: the despair of not wanting to be who you are. This person hides behind roles, routines, expectations. They conform, they stay on autopilot. They call it peace, but inside, they're at war with themselves. The despair of wanting to be who you are, but not knowing how. This one cuts deeper. It's the painful awareness that there's something true inside you, a voice, a calling, that you haven't lived up to yet. And it hurts, because it demands courage. Kierkegaard called this struggle the leap of faith. Not faith in the religious sense, but faith as an act of inner bravery. The courage to throw yourself into the unknown, to take full responsibility, to embrace the mystery of being. It's the only way out of despair, not by avoiding the anxiety, but by facing it, living your freedom with maturity, honesty, and passion. And that leap, it's never guaranteed. There's no proof, no logic to hold on to. It's a silent, radical decision to be true to yourself, even when it hurts. Kierkegaard knew this was terrifying. Most people would rather hide in safe roles, inherited morals, or fixed identities. But he warned, that's just another kind of quiet despair. Maybe the most dangerous kind. Because someone who suffers deeply is at least still alive. But someone who's numb has already given up. And this is what makes Kierkegaard so powerful. He doesn't speak from some cold, distant system. He looks you in the eyes and says, I see you. I know what it's like to feel lost, to stare into the void. But you have to choose. You have to leap. You have to live authentically. For him, freedom isn't the ability to do anything. It's the ability to be someone. Someone who takes responsibility. someone who owns their story, someone who lives with integrity. And that's why freedom and anxiety walk side by side, because real freedom comes at an emotional cost. The idea of freedom without fear is a modern myth. True freedom comes with trembling, but it also brings truth, courage, and beauty. Have you ever felt that dizzying anxiety before a big decision? Do you feel like you're living authentically or just playing it safe to avoid the fear? Kierkegaard reminds us, anxiety isn't the end of freedom. It's the beginning. It's the signal that you're still alive and that you can still become more than what you've been. Michel Foucault challenges us with an uncomfortable question. What if our freedom is just a sophisticated illusion? What if, even when we believe we're choosing freely, we're actually just operating within a system of invisible rules, limits, and norms that shape everything we think and want? According to Foucault, what we call free choice is actually a choice between options that have already been laid out by power structures. We don't live outside the system, we're shaped by it. And these structures of power aren't just political or economic, they're in our language, in medicine, in psychology, in sexuality, in education, in religion. Everything around us is embedded in discourses, frameworks of knowledge and practice that define what can be said, what can be thought, and what can be lived. Do you believe you desire what you desire because it's truly yours? Foucault would say, you desire what the discourse made desirable. Think about your career, your body, your lifestyle, your identity. Yes, you chose them, but from a set of possibilities shaped by centuries of norms, exclusions, and categories. It's like playing a game where the board, rules, and limits were set long before you ever got here. You can move your pieces, but the game was already in motion. Foucault called this micro-power. It's not a king giving orders. It's a diffuse, subtle form of power that works through everyday life. It's in textbooks, doctors, offices, advertising, public policy, diagnoses, and social media. This power doesn't just oppress, it shapes us. It doesn't use chains, it uses norms. And here's the scary part. It gets us to want to be exactly what it needs us to be. That's why Foucault talks about the subject, in both senses of the word, the one who acts and the one who is acted upon. We are subjects of our actions, but also subjected by the discourses that define us. When you say, "This is who I am," it's worth asking, where did that identity come from? Who validated it? Who said that was normal? You might feel free because you can choose your lifestyle, your appearance, your relationships. But who defined which lifestyles were possible? Who decided which kinds of love are legitimate? Who put certain bodies at the center and pushed others to the margins? So, yes, freedom exists, but it's situated, it's conditional, it's watched. It exists within the limits of discourse. A powerful example is Foucault's work on sexuality. Western societies didn't just silence sex, they classified it. They created labels: normal, abnormal, perverted, repressed. And they built systems of control disguised as science, psychology, even healing. What looked like liberation was often just power in a new outfit. It wasn't the end of repression, it was its transformation. And this applies to almost everything. School doesn't just educate, it disciplines. Medicine doesn't just heal, it defines what's healthy. Law doesn't just punish, it classifies people as dangerous or not. These systems create acceptable ways of living, and we learn to fit in, or we pay the price for stepping outside. But Foucault isn't a nihilist. He's not saying there's no freedom. He's saying freedom only becomes real when we're aware of what's shaping us. As long as we believe we're fully autonomous, we're just repeating patterns. But once we start to see the forces running through us, we can begin to resist. And resistance, for Foucault, doesn't come from outside the system. It happens within it, in the cracks, in the slips, in small acts of rebellion, in new ways of speaking and being. Freedom, then, isn't the absence of power. It's the struggle within power. Have you ever realized that something you thought was a free choice was actually shaped by society's expectations? Have you tried to reinvent yourself and felt invisible forces pushing you back into the acceptable? Foucault invites us to question the freedom we've been sold and to search for a freedom that's harder, sharper, more awake, the kind of freedom that starts by seeing the invisible walls and then slowly, persistently, pushing back against them. Karl Marx didn't see freedom as some abstract idea. For him, freedom wasn't about willpower or personal choices. It was about material conditions, concrete, structural. You're only truly free if you actually have the real conditions to be free. Without those conditions, freedom is just for show. That's why Marx said, the free individual presented in capitalist ideology is a myth designed to cover up deep systems of exploitation. We live in a society that constantly tells us, you're free to choose your own path. But Marx asks, free? With what resources? In what context? With how much control over your own life? What's the point of saying someone is free to build a future if they spend every day selling their labor for a wage that barely covers basic survival? What good is freedom if it's only accessible to people who already have money, time, safety, healthcare, and education? To Marx, this kind of liberal, individualistic, merit-based freedom is just an ideological fantasy. It hides the reality that most people live in alienation, tied to a system that reduces them to tools of production. And that brings us to one of the most important ideas in Marxist thought: alienation. Alienation, for Marx, is when workers no longer see themselves in what they create. They work, produce, build, but the result of their effort doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the boss, the company, the market. Workers sell their time, energy, and creativity and get a paycheck in return. But that paycheck is never equal to the value they actually generate. That gap, what Marx calls surplus value, is where exploitation lives, and this exploitation is often invisible because it's disguised as a free contract. The company says, you agreed to this job, it was your choice, but Marx responds, a choice made out of necessity isn't really a choice. If you have to work to avoid starving, that's not freedom, that's coercion in disguise. And alienation isn't just economic, it's existential. Humans, Marx believed, need to see themselves in their work, to feel connected to what they produce. But under capitalism, work becomes a commodity, time becomes a product, the human being becomes a resource. People stop being creators of meaning. They become just another gear in the machine. They work to survive, not to live. They chase goals they didn't choose. They burn out as a routine and are taught to see it as a badge of honor. This deep alienation creates what Marx called commodity fetishism. Human relationships become mediated by things. Value is no longer based on dignity, effort, or creativity. It's based on price. You're worth what you earn. Your time is priced by the hour. Your affection becomes status. Your body becomes part of the consumer package. Everything becomes a transaction, a performance, a showcase. In that world, freedom becomes a marketing slogan. You're free to buy, to hustle, to compete, but not free to rest, to refuse, or just to be. That's why Marx talks about class consciousness, because only when someone realizes that their freedom is framed by inequality can they begin to resist it. Class consciousness happens when workers stop seeing themselves as isolated individuals and start seeing themselves as part of a larger, oppressed group. When they realize their condition isn't because they didn't try hard enough, but because the system is built to keep them limited, and that's where change becomes possible. Because for Marx, true freedom isn't individual, it's collective. It's not enough for a few people to have access to opportunity. We need material conditions that allow everyone to live with dignity. Without social justice, there's no freedom. Without equal access to time, protection, knowledge, culture. All talk of freedom is just noise. Do you feel like you truly have freedom in your choices? Or do you sometimes feel like you're just choosing from what's possible in your current reality? Have you ever felt like your life is being bought in hours, goals, productivity, and there's no time left to be yourself? For Marx, freedom isn't a right written in law. It's a material condition that has to be built together. And as long as structural inequality exists, freedom will remain a privilege for the few and alienation for the rest. We live in a world where freedom is often tied to desire. We're told that the more we want, the more we achieve, the more we own, the freer we are. But what if that equation is completely backwards? For Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, freedom doesn't come from desire, it comes from letting it go. And it's not about repressing desire out of guilt or morality. It's about deeply understanding where it comes from and realizing that desire is the root of suffering. At the heart of Buddhism are the Four Noble Truths, and the second one says it clearly. Suffering, dukkha, comes from craving, tanha. We crave constantly. We want love, success, youth, security, meaning, control. We want things to be different than they are. We want the good moments to last forever, and the painful ones to never happen. That inner pull, the need for things to be other than what they are, is what keeps us trapped. Buddha didn't say desire was morally wrong. He said it's an illusion, a reaction to the impermanence of life. We try to freeze time, hold on to happiness, control change. But life is change. It's loss, growth, transformation. So the problem isn't life. It's our expectations, our belief that something out there will complete us or protect us forever. And desire only has power because it centers around something we assume is real, the self. But what if that self is also an illusion? Buddha taught that there is no permanent self. What we call I is just a bundle of 5 constantly changing things: form, the body, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These 5 are always shifting, like clouds, like wind. You're not the same person you were a year ago. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. The body ages. Nothing stays the same. Yet we cling to the idea of a solid, permanent me at the center of our experience. And that creates fear, attachment, anxiety. Because if there's a me, it needs to win, succeed, be protected, be admired. And so begins the chase against time, against others, even against ourselves. But Buddha offers a way out, real. Freedom begins when we stop identifying with the false self. Not by denying that we exist, but by letting go of the belief that this self is fixed, absolute, or eternal. When we stop clinging to that identity, fear starts to fade. There's no longer a me that constantly needs defending. Pain still happens, but suffering, the drama, the resistance, the inner turmoil, begins to dissolve. This process of letting go of the self and desire is what leads to nirvana, not as some mystical paradise, but as an inner state of release. Nirvana is the extinguishing of the fire of craving, aversion, and ignorance. It's the quiet peace of someone who no longer needs to cling to anything to feel whole. And this path isn't based on belief, it's a practice. Buddha didn't give us doctrines, he gave us a method, the Noble Eightfold Path. Things like right view, right action, right effort, mindfulness, and meditation, all with one goal: awakening, seeing clearly, and in seeing, becoming free. This isn't about escaping life, it's about being fully present in it. Without clinging, without illusion, without self-deception, you can still love, but without needing to possess. You can work, but without tying your worth to success or failure. You can enjoy, but without expecting joy to last forever. You can feel pain, but without turning it into endless suffering. It's a quiet kind of freedom. It doesn't shout, It doesn't show off. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply is. And from that stillness, compassion arises. Because when you realize the self is fluid, you start seeing that in others too. Everyone's caught up in craving, ego, fear. And instead of judging, you begin to understand. You stop fighting the world and start welcoming it. Not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Yes, you still act, you still create. But now, it's from awareness, not from the compulsion to be somebody. And this brings us to something subtle, but powerful. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's not being enslaved by anything. Not by others, not by society, not even by yourself. Have you ever chased something, only to feel empty after getting it? Have you ever felt peace, not because you gained something, but because you finally let something go? Comment below. I'd love to hear how this teaching resonates with your life. And if this chapter touched something deep in you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still thinks freedom means having everything, when maybe it means just the opposite. True freedom isn't about conquering the world. It's about letting go of the illusion that you need to, and when the self dissolves, all that's left is peace. Peace. In the West, many traditions have linked freedom to willpower, the strength to choose, act, dominate, and take control. But Laozi, the ancient Chinese sage credited with writing the Tao Te Ching, offers something completely different. Freedom isn't about forcing life to bend to your will. It's about flowing with the natural rhythm of things. The Tao, or Tao, isn't a god or a personal being. It's a principle, a path, a way the universe moves, present in everything, yet impossible to fully explain or hold on to. In the very first line of the Tao Te Ching, Laozi says, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao." It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you grip, the faster it slips through. And life is the same way. The more we try to control everything, people, outcomes, emotions, time, the more we disconnect from real freedom. Because control is rooted in fear. And fear, according to Laozi, is a sign that we've lost touch with the Tao. So what does it mean to follow the Tao? It means acting without forcing, moving with ease, choosing wisely, stepping in only when truly needed, and always with respect for the natural flow of things. This is the idea of wu wei, often translated as non-action, but more accurately, effortless action or action in harmony. But make no mistake, wu wei isn't passivity. It's not doing nothing. It's doing only what's needed, at the right time, in the right way. It's like a river flowing around rocks instead of breaking through them. Like bamboo that bends, in the wind, but doesn't snap. Like someone who knows when to speak and when to stay silent. Following the Tao is about realizing that life already has a rhythm. And when we align with that rhythm, things become more peaceful, more fluid, more balanced. Those who try to control everything, they burn out, they lose joy, they disconnect from what's real. Because they're constantly fighting against what is. They live trapped in frustration, trying to force life to match their expectations. But the wise one, the true sage, doesn't try to dominate. They try to understand. They observe more than they intervene. They trust time. They know the seasons. They move with grace, humility, and presence. This may sound far from our modern world, a world obsessed with hustle, results, total control. But maybe that's exactly why we need Laozi's wisdom now more than ever. We live in an age of over-control, calendars booked down to the minute, bodies shaped to trends, relationships tracked by apps, performance measured in real time, and a constant pressure to stay in control of everything. But deep down, we know we control very little. Plans fall apart, time flies, emotions shift, people come and go, and underneath all that control is often exhaustion. Laozi invites us to let go, to stop rowing against the current every second, to realize the water already knows the way. He writes, "Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished." This doesn't mean you leave life up to chance. It means you act with clarity, not panic. It means knowing when to move and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to push and when to rest. True freedom, according to Laozi, is letting go of the illusion that everything must be under your control. It begins when you trust the wisdom of life itself, and that shift touches every area of life. In relationships, when you stop trying to change others and start listening with presence. In work, when you stop chasing validation and start offering your best from a place of balance. In health, when you stop obsessing over your body and start caring for it gently. In the mind, when you stop overthinking and learn that sometimes silence heals more than 1,000 thoughts. Have you ever felt burned out trying to control everything? Have you experienced that moment when you let go and suddenly everything started to flow? Do you feel in tune with life's rhythm, or are you constantly trying to bend it to your will? Laozi's wisdom isn't an escape from reality. It's a reconnection to it. It's an invitation to lighten up, to listen, to be still. You don't have to chase freedom. It's already here, the moment you stop forcing and start flowing. Simone de Beauvoir reminds us that freedom is not a solo experience. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, separate from society, economic conditions, or human relationships. On the contrary, my freedom is only real if others also have the chance to be free. And that's a powerful shift. It breaks down the individualistic idea of freedom as something personal, private, and disconnected from the world. Beauvoir shows us that you can't be truly free while others around you are still oppressed. Freedom that ignores others? That's not real freedom. It's privilege in disguise. Beauvoir was part of the existentialist tradition. Like Sartre, her lifelong philosophical and romantic partner, she believed that humans are not born with a fixed essence. We become who we are through the choices we make. But can you really make choices if you don't have the means to do so? What about a woman born in a patriarchal society, raised to obey, denied education, and lacking economic independence? Can she truly choose to be free? What about a worker surviving on minimum wage with no time to reflect on life, no energy to question their reality? Can they be blamed for not finding inner freedom? Beauvoir's answer is clear: no. Because freedom isn't just about mindset, it's about real-world possibilities. She once said, to want freedom is to also want it for others. That changes everything. Freedom, then, becomes a responsibility. It's not something you have alone. It's something you build together. It's ethical. It's collective. Because if my freedom depends on others existing, then I can't ignore their oppression. In The Second Sex, Beauvoir used the example of women to show how material oppression shapes identity. She famously wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." In other words, identity isn't natural. It's built through expectations, limitations, and imposed roles. And this logic applies to all marginalized groups. Black people, LGBTQ+ people, people with disabilities, people living in poverty. If society puts up barriers, legal, economic, symbolic, then those people's freedom is truly restricted. Beauvoir's philosophy invites us to see the world with more honesty. Not everyone starts at the same place. Not everyone has the same ability to choose. So, judging others based on your own privilege, that's a form of violence. She breaks the illusion of existential meritocracy, saying, you just have to want it badly enough, isn't helpful. Because wanting something doesn't change the system. Yes, Beauvoir believed in personal responsibility, but responsibility only works when people have access to basic dignity, safety, and opportunity. She believed in human transcendence, that we can rise above our circumstances, but she also acknowledged real-world limits, structural, social, and historical. Freedom isn't magic. It's built. and often it's fought for. That's why she proposed an ethic of reciprocity. My existence becomes complete when I recognize the humanity of others and fight for their ability to exist fully, too. Oppression isn't just an individual issue, it affects the whole of humanity. And if I'm sitting comfortably in my own freedom while others are denied theirs, then I'm not actually living free. I'm living blind. This changes how we think about real life. How many times have we defended freedom of speech without thinking about another person's freedom to live without harm? How often do we talk about freedom of choice without asking whether others had real choices to begin with? Beauvoir asks us a hard question. Are you calling it freedom when it's actually privilege? Have you ever realized that your freedom is propped up by someone else's lack of it? Have you seen how in some situations, freedom with dignity just isn't an option for everyone? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your take. And if this chapter made you think differently, leave a like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes freedom is just about wanting it enough. Freedom, for Beauvoir, isn't selfish. It's an active commitment to the freedom of others. Because only when we all can live with dignity, choice, and authenticity, freedom stops being a privilege and becomes a shared truth. Carl Jung gave us a warning that feels more relevant than ever. You might think you're free, but if you don't know your shadow, who's really making your decisions? We go through life believing we're fully aware of our values, our choices, our feelings. But according to Jung, that's only half the story. Our conscious mind, the part we know, is just a small island surrounded by a vast ocean, the unconscious. And deep in that unconscious lies the shadow, one of Jung's most powerful ideas. The shadow is everything we reject in ourselves, everything we think is ugly, shameful, dangerous, or inappropriate. It's all the impulses, emotions, and desires that don't match the image we want to show the world. Want to appear strong? You bury your vulnerability. Want to be seen as kind? You hide your resentment. Want to be loved? You suppress your jealousy, your anger, your envy. Where do all those parts go? To the shadow. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It stays alive and active, waiting for an opening. And often, it acts for us, without us even realizing it. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That hits hard, because if we don't know what's really driving our behavior, can we truly call ourselves free? Think about it. Did you really choose your career path freely? Or were you influenced by fear of disappointing someone? A need for approval? Maybe insecurity hiding behind logic? What about your relationships? Were they conscious choices? Or patterns repeating from past wounds and unmet needs? The shadow shows up in our overreactions, our compulsions, our quick judgments. We often project what we hate in ourselves onto other people. Hate someone for being arrogant? It might be your own unacknowledged arrogance trying to get your attention. The more we deny our shadow, the more power it has. It quietly shapes our decisions, relationships, and worldview. And yet, we still think we're in control. That's why Jung was clear. Freedom doesn't come from fixing your shadow. It comes from knowing it. It's not about getting rid of what's bad in you. That's not possible. It's about recognizing that you are complex, imperfect, and full of contradictions, and your light only shines fully when it moves through your darkness. The shadow isn't just made of negative traits. It also holds the parts of you that got buried out of fear, like creativity, courage, sensuality, your voice. Maybe you were taught to be quiet and obedient. Maybe you silenced your passions to fit in. Those powers live in the shadow too. That's why Jung believed the path to becoming your true self, a process he called individuation, isn't about being good. It's about becoming whole. You have to ask, what part of me am I afraid to face? Then start listening. Start making peace with that part. Start realizing that real freedom doesn't come from being pure. It comes from being complete. Only when you know your inner patterns can you make choices with awareness, not compulsion. Your anger becomes something you can express maturely. Your fear becomes a signal, not a prison. Your contradictions stop being shameful and become human. Freedom, then, isn't suppression. It's integration. It's being able to look in the mirror and say, yeah, this is part of me too. And even so, I can choose consciously, not automatically. Have you noticed patterns in your life that keep repeating, even when you try to change? Do you have the courage to look inside and ask, what am I avoiding seeing in myself? Jung reminds us that freedom isn't a fantasy, but it is a deep inner process, a process of digging, of accepting, of transforming, because only when we stop running from ourselves can we start to make choices with truth, with clarity, and with soul. Most Western philosophies revolve around one big question: who am I? And in trying to answer it, we spend our lives building a solid identity, something clear, consistent, and stable. We want to define ourselves, to be someone, to have a clear personality, a strong purpose, a straight path. But Zhuangzi, one of the great Taoist philosophers from ancient China, flips that idea on its head. For him, true freedom doesn't come from knowing who you are. It comes from not needing to know. That might sound strange at first, even confusing. How can someone live well without a solid sense of self? Zhuangzi's answer: you're not a fixed shape, you're a flow, a movement, a constant transformation, like water, like wind, like the changing seasons. And the more you try to lock that flow into a rigid identity, the more you suffer. You shrink, you get stuck, you disconnect from life, because life never stops changing. He used simple but powerful metaphors, like the famous story of the man who dreams he's a butterfly, but when he wakes up, he's not sure. Did he dream he was a butterfly? Or is the butterfly now dreaming she's a man? It's not just a cute story. It's a challenge to the very idea of a fixed identity. It reminds us that the lines between me and not me, between reality and dream, are way more fluid than we think. And why is that so freeing? Because so much of our suffering comes from trying to hold on to some fixed idea of ourselves. We want to be strong, certain, confident, put together. But then life shows up and shakes it all. Your body changes, your relationships change, your beliefs evolve, and suddenly you feel lost, like you're failing at being someone. Zhuangzi says, you're not failing, you're just alive. Life is change. Freedom isn't resisting that change, it's learning to dance with it. Think about someone who sees themselves as smart. Their whole self-worth is tied to that. So when they make a mistake or get criticized, their world collapses. Why? Because they're not just facing the situation. They're trying to defend an identity. And that's the thing. Every fixed identity becomes a cage, even the good ones. Because once we lock into a label, we stop being spontaneous. We live to match an image, not to experience life. Zhuangzi offers a different way. He speaks of the wise person as someone who moves like water. They adapt. They change without losing their essence. They don't cling to ideas of who they should be. They just live. This person doesn't need to know who they are. They are fully present in the moment, not stuck trying to maintain an ego, not busy defending a self-image. And that is freedom. Freedom from the past. Freedom from the pressure of some perfect future. Freedom from the trap of always trying to be consistent. Zhuangzi calls this living in the Tao, the natural flow of life. And the Tao doesn't ask for control or force. It asks for listening, surrender, sensitivity. Identity, in this view, isn't armor. It's a set of clothes, something you wear and take off, depending on the day. Sometimes you're strong, sometimes you're fragile, sometimes you know, Sometimes you don't, and it's all okay. A mind that understands this stops fighting itself, stops trying to be perfect, stops needing to explain itself all the time. And in that space, real authenticity shows up. Not the kind built on labels, but the kind that flows from being fully open to life. Have you ever felt trapped trying to be who you should be? Can you let yourself be messy, changing, and still feel whole? Zhuangzi isn't telling us to float through life with no direction. He's asking us to stop clinging to dead forms. Who you are today doesn't have to be who you were yesterday, and it won't be who you are tomorrow. That's the beauty of it. Freedom is the ability to change, to grow, to reinvent. Real freedom, for Zhuangzi, isn't in asserting who you are. It's in letting yourself flow. Like the butterfly in the dream. You're free the moment you stop asking whether you're the dreamer or the dream and just start flying. Most people say they want to be free. We talk about freedom with pride, as if it's a basic right, a universal goal. But what if, deep down, we don't really want to be free? What if, as Fromm argued, freedom is such a terrifying experience that many of us actually try to escape from it, without even realizing? In his classic book, Escape from Freedom, Fromm explains that real freedom can be overwhelming for those who aren't prepared to handle it. Because being free isn't just about doing whatever you want. It means being fully responsible for yourself. No more hiding behind orders, rigid rules, or external systems. It means realizing your life is yours, for better or worse. And, for a lot of people, that's scarier than any kind of prison. Fromm wrote this in the context of the 20th century, witnessing the rise of totalitarian regimes like Nazism. He noticed that millions of people voluntarily gave up their freedom to authoritarian leaders, in exchange for a sense of security, belonging, and simplicity. But this isn't just something that happens in extreme political systems. It plays out every day in small choices, when we follow the crowd instead of standing by our own opinions, when we follow rules blindly just to avoid the discomfort of thinking for ourselves, when we choose the easy path over the truthful one. Fromm calls this escape from freedom, and he identifies three main ways it shows up. Authoritarianism. The person gives up their autonomy to someone stronger. They let someone else think for them, decide for them, take the risk for them. In return, they feel safe, but that safety comes at the cost of their freedom. Destructiveness. Here, the anxiety of being free turns into aggression. The person lashes out at what reminds them of their own weakness, others, differences, anything that challenges their worldview. Violence becomes a way to cope with inner emptiness. Conformity, maybe the most common form. The person shapes themselves to fit social expectations. They think what others think, do what others do, live the way they're supposed to. It feels like freedom, but deep down, it's just survival through imitation. Fromm explains that these strategies are so common because freedom isn't natural. It's something we have to grow into. Being free means making choices without guarantees. It means facing uncertainty. It means accepting that there's no perfect script to follow, and often we'll be alone in the decisions we make. But that's also what makes freedom powerful. Because, for Fromm, the answer isn't to run from freedom, it's to grow into it, to turn fear into action, emptiness into creativity, loneliness into connection, not through submission, but through mutual recognition. That's what he calls individuation, the process of becoming your true self, not just a product of society, a person who thinks, feels, chooses, and owns their choices. This is what Fromm calls positive freedom. It's not just freedom from restrictions. It's freedom to become, to love, to create meaning. But that kind of freedom requires inner strength. Fromm said we need emotional roots, healthy bonds, and a solid internal foundation. Otherwise, fear takes over, and we go running back to authority figures, rigid systems, or identity-based tribes. And here's the part that hits hardest today. We live in a world with more formal freedom than ever. But so many people feel lost, anxious, alone, and disconnected. So they flock to leaders who offer easy answers, ready-made identities, and absolute truths. Fromm would warn us, that's not freedom. That's escape. Have you ever felt tempted to let someone else make the hard choices for you, just to avoid the weight of responsibility? Have you caught yourself repeating opinions or habits just to feel like you belong? Do you really feel free? Or are you just following a path laid out by other people's expectations? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. And if this chapter spoke to something inside you, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who talks about freedom but might be stuck in an invisible cage. Fromm reminds us that freedom is, first and foremost, a psychological challenge. It's a call to responsibility, a bold invitation to live without crutches, without masks, without absolute masters. Freedom isn't for the weak, it's for the whole, for those who feel fear, but choose anyway, for those who doubt, but move forward anyway, for those who know that freedom is more than doing whatever you want, it's becoming who you are, even when the cost is high. British philosopher John Stuart Mill is one of the most important voices when it comes to individual liberty. In his most influential work, On Liberty, 1859, he laid out one of the most debated ideas in modern political thought. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against their will is to prevent harm to others. It's a simple and elegant idea, but also deeply challenging. Mill wasn't just concerned with freedom as an abstract right. He cared about how it actually works in real life. He wanted to know, where does my freedom end? And where does someone else's begin? That's where he introduced the harm principle. The only ethical reason to limit someone's freedom is to stop them from causing harm to someone else. But here's where things get tricky. What exactly counts as harm? Is being offended harm? Is emotional pain harm? Is feeling uncomfortable around someone's lifestyle harm? These questions still hit hard today, just like they did in the 1800s. Mill strongly believed in personal freedom as one of the foundations of human dignity. To him, freedom is what allows people to grow intellectually, emotionally, and morally. Without freedom of thought, speech, choice, and lifestyle, people become robotic, repeating dogmas, obeying blindly, living without true identity. But Mill also understood that we don't live in isolation. We live in society. And when people live together, their freedoms will sometimes clash. So freedom can't be absolute. It needs an ethical boundary. And for Mill, that boundary is the other person, not their moral beliefs, not their opinions, but their real well-being. To say that someone is free to do what they want, up to the point where it harms someone else, is to say that freedom comes with responsibility. But how do we tell the difference between real harm and just disagreement? Mill made an important distinction. Harm is something that directly affects someone's physical, emotional, or social integrity. It's something that interferes with their right to be free. Discomfort, on the other hand, is not harm. For example, someone living in a non-traditional way, in how they dress, love, believe, or express themselves, might make others uncomfortable. But that discomfort isn't harm. It's just the cost of living in a free society. According to Mill, letting the dominant morality decide what others can or can't do is a recipe for the tyranny of the majority. Freedom only means something if it protects the unpopular, the different, the uncomfortable. Otherwise, it's just privilege for those who fit the mold. But what about harm that isn't visible? This is where Mill's theory becomes even more difficult. Not all harm is obvious. Words can hurt. Ideas can reinforce oppression. Silence can be deadly. So how do we tell the difference between free speech and hate speech? When does a peaceful opinion become a real threat to someone's dignity or safety? Mill didn't have all the answers, but he gave us a compass. The more power you have, the more responsibility you carry. Harm isn't just about intention, it's also about impact. This requires a mature society, one that knows how to balance the right to speak freely with the duty to protect people who might be silenced or hurt. Mill warned us, freedom is never guaranteed. It must be defended constantly against authoritarian governments, against disguised censorship, against the pressure to conform. But he also reminded us, freedom without limits can turn into violence, and limits without clarity can turn into censorship. That's why Mill pushes us to think more deeply. It's not enough to say, freedom for all, if we don't know what that looks like in real life. We can't live in a truly free society without accepting the discomfort that comes with difference. But we also can't let people use difference as an excuse to hurt or silence others. It's a thin line, a tough balance, but Mill believed it was worth it. Have you ever felt your freedom was threatened by rules that claim to protect others? How do you tell the difference between something that just bothers you and something that truly harms? John Stuart Mill believed that freedom is non-negotiable, but that it only works when we add ethical limits, collective responsibility, and the courage to live with ideas that challenge us. After all, freedom only grows where difference is allowed and respected. Isaiah Berlin, one of the most influential political thinkers of the 20th century, made a distinction that still echoes in today's debates about rights, power, and democracy. He separated freedom into two fundamental concepts: negative liberty and positive liberty. At first glance, it sounds simple, but it goes deep, especially when freedom is used as a reason to control others. Negative liberty: leave me alone. For Berlin, negative liberty is what we usually think of when we talk about individual freedom. It's the right not to be interfered with. It's the personal space where you can think, speak, live, and choose freely, without being controlled by the government, religion, or society. It's expressed in phrases like, "I have the right to make my own decisions." "No, one can stop me from living how I want, as long as I'm not hurting anyone else. My life, my choices." Negative liberty is freedom from interference. It protects individuals from external control. It's the foundation of many democratic constitutions: freedom of speech, religion, movement, thought. But Berlin knew that this kind of freedom doesn't solve everything. Someone might be legally free, but still stuck in poverty, without access to education or basic rights. They're free, but can't actually live freely. Positive liberty: being your own master. Positive liberty is the power to take control of your own life. It's the idea that you're only truly free when you're not ruled by ignorance, addiction, poverty, or fear. It asks, who are you, beyond the circumstances that shaped you? Do you actually have the means to make meaningful choices? This idea can be inspiring. It shows up in social movements, educational reforms, and the fight for equality. It pushes for dignity, awareness, opportunity. But Berlin raises the alarm. What happens when someone else decides what's best for you and forces it on you in the name of freedom? The hidden danger of positive liberty: when someone says, "I know what you really need to be free," freedom can become a form of control. Suddenly, coercion gets rebranded as help. Censorship becomes protection. Obedience turns into personal growth. History is full of examples. Authoritarian regimes claiming to liberate people from ignorance. Dictators calling themselves guides for the people. Religions imposing rigid rules for your soul. Governments justifying violence as a way to re-educate society. When positive liberty is misunderstood or misused, it gives someone the power to decide what's good for others and to force them into it. It becomes, "You don't know what freedom is, so I'll make you free." That's a dangerous contradiction. It turns freedom into a tool of domination. Berlin saw this as a constant threat. He wasn't against positive liberty, but he warned, anytime freedom is used to justify suppressing someone's will, we have to ask, freedom for whom? Defined by who? Imposed by who? The tension between autonomy and paternalism, sure, some people do need help. Those struggling with addiction, extreme poverty, or cultural oppression might not have the tools to fully exercise their freedom. So the question becomes, how do we help without becoming authoritarian? How do we offer support without taking away someone's agency? Berlin didn't offer easy answers, but he emphasized this. Freedom must always include pluralism. There's no one-size-fits-all version of a good life. Everyone should be free to find their own way, even if it's not what we would choose for them. And that takes maturity. It means accepting that not everyone will do what you think is right. And sometimes, true freedom means letting people make mistakes, explore, and learn for themselves. Have you ever found yourself trying to control someone for their own good? Can you handle someone else's freedom, even when it clashes with your beliefs? Isaiah Berlin reminds us that freedom is an ambiguous concept, and that makes it vulnerable. It can be used to uplift or to oppress. That's why he called for constant vigilance. Because in the name of freedom, many have imposed control disguised as care. And in the name of helping others, many have silenced voices that simply wanted to be heard. Real freedom doesn't impose. It invites. It doesn't define what's best. It makes space for each person to discover that for themselves. Slavoj Žižek is not the kind of philosopher who offers comfort. He doesn't believe in easy solutions or inspirational sound bites about finding your truth. In fact, for Žižek, the whole idea of complete freedom is just a well-polished illusion, and that's what makes his view so provocative. You'll never be completely free, but you can choose which form of alienation you want to live with. The illusion of total freedom. We live in a culture that sells freedom as the ultimate goal. Freedom of choice, freedom of identity, freedom to express yourself. But Žižek asks, is that really freedom? Or is it just a more subtle form of control? He argues that we're always operating inside symbolic structures, the invisible systems that shape how we think, what we want, and how we act. These structures include language, culture, media, ideology, social norms, and they frame how we see the world long before we think we're choosing anything. Sure, you can choose your lifestyle, your aesthetic, your opinions, but those options are already pre-packaged by society. You can be spiritual, liberal, rebellious, minimalist, or alternative. But all of these are existing roles. You're just picking one from the shelf. So in this sense, freedom isn't about escaping alienation. It's about picking which form of alienation you're okay with. So what is alienation? For Žižek, alienation isn't just about being disconnected from something. It's about being shaped, even controlled, by a symbolic system that we don't fully understand. You think you're making choices, but really, you're just following a script written long before you arrived. It shows up in the way you talk, what you buy, how you date, what you think is right or wrong even, how you define happiness. None of that is neutral or purely personal. It's all part of a larger cultural code, one that often goes unquestioned. Freedom as a radical act. So what's left of freedom? Žižek would say, there's no freedom outside ideology, but there's awareness. And that awareness is where real freedom begins. True freedom isn't pretending you're not influenced. It's seeing how you're influenced and choosing to respond in a conscious, creative, maybe even subversive way. You don't have to reject the system entirely, but you can disrupt it, play with it, remix it, challenge it. Freedom is not the absence of structure. It's acting freely within the structure, once you realize it's there. Here's the hard part. Ideology works best when you don't notice it, and the clearest sign that you're deeply embedded in it is when you're convinced that you're not. Everyday examples: you bought that phone because you liked the design, or because culture taught you to associate tech with status and success. You think you freely choose what you watch online, or are you just reacting to an algorithm that already filtered your world? You think you decided who you are, or are you just playing a role society offered you? These questions aren't meant to make you feel guilty. They're meant to spark awareness, because freedom isn't comfort, it's discomfort. It's the moment you realize your beliefs, habits, and identity aren't as yours as you thought, and you choose anyway. Have you ever realized that what felt like a personal decision was actually a cultural script? Have you ever felt trapped in a role but didn't know what else there was? Can you ask yourself honestly, did this idea come from me, or was it placed in me? Žižek doesn't try to give you peace of mind. He wants to shake your assumptions, because no one's fully outside the system. But we can change the way we move through it. We can stop blindly following. We can recognize the language that shapes us, and maybe begin to rewrite it. Freedom isn't the absence of alienation. It's the awareness of it, and the courage to choose anyway, with clarity, with agency, with eyes wide open. For Martin Heidegger, one of the most influential and complex thinkers of the 20th century, freedom isn't something you simply have. It's not about doing whatever you want or having endless options in the marketplace of life. Freedom, for Heidegger, is a radical experience. And it only reveals itself when you face what most people spend their whole lives avoiding: your own death. Freedom. Through mortality, yes. To Heidegger, true freedom only becomes possible when you fully confront your mortality. As long as you keep running from the reality that your life will end, you're not really living freely. You're stuck in distractions, routines, and surface-level roles. He starts his philosophy with a striking observation. Humans aren't just beings who exist. We're beings who are aware of our own existence, and more deeply, we know that it will one day come to an end. To describe this, Heidegger uses the term Dasein, a being there, a presence thrown into the world, always heading toward its end. We are, by nature, beings toward death, and that awareness changes everything. The problem of inauthenticity. But here's the thing. Most people avoid this awareness. They pretend death is far away. They live like they have all the time in the world. This leads to what Heidegger calls inauthentic living. Not because people are lying, but because they're living on autopilot. They fall into the habits of the they, society's default setting. This is how it's done. This is what people think. This is what life is about. You wake up, go to work, scroll your phone, chase the next goal. But all of it might be happening without reflection, without depth, without an honest relationship with your own mortality. And while this happens, time keeps moving. Silently, irreversibly. The freedom of facing death to Heidegger, freedom doesn't mean a life without limits. It means having the courage to face the ultimate limit, death. When you confront your mortality honestly, something shifts. You realize you don't have time to waste. You can't keep living someone else's version of life. You can't keep hiding behind roles, expectations, or distractions. You feel the weight and the clarity of one powerful truth. I'm going to die, and only I can live my life. That's when freedom becomes authentic. Because you stop numbing yourself. You stop lying to yourself. You start asking the real questions. What am I doing with the time I have? This is Heidegger's idea of freedom. Not the freedom of shallow choice, but the freedom to live truthfully in the face of being. Not a call to despair, but to depth. This isn't a call to despair. Quite the opposite. It's a call to depth. To live with more meaning, more presence, more intensity. Thinking about death isn't morbid, it's honest. It helps you stop wasting time on the trivial and focus on what actually matters. When you recognize that death is part of life, your sense of time changes. Your relationships change. Your work changes. Your relationship with yourself changes because now you know you're not here forever. And with that realization, you might finally begin to live like your life actually matters. Questions. Worth asking. Have you ever had a moment where you truly felt how short life is and it changed something in you? Have you noticed how often you live on autopilot, avoiding thoughts of death like a mirror you don't want to look into? If you were fully aware of your own mortality right now, what would you do differently today? Heidegger reminds us, life only becomes truly ours when we face death head-on, not as something tragic, but as something real, something unique, something that only exists here and now. Freedom isn't about options, it's about time freedom. Isn't about how many choices we have. It's about how we relate to the time we've been given. It's about having the courage to face the end and live the present like it actually means something. For the philosopher Hannah Arendt, freedom isn't just a personal state of mind. It's not some abstract idea, and it's not just a formal right on paper. To her, freedom is something lived out in the real world, and most importantly, lived together. In other words, real freedom doesn't exist in isolation. It doesn't hide. It needs a public space to actually happen. Freedom isn't just private. This view is very different from how we usually think about freedom today. In modern life, we often associate freedom with privacy, the ability to do what we want behind closed doors, far from the eyes of the state, society, or moral norms. But Arendt flips that idea upside down. Freedom doesn't come from hiding away. It comes from stepping into the world with others. She believed that freedom, in its deepest sense, is a political phenomenon. Not political in the party or election sense, but political as in the shared space where people come together to speak, act, create, and decide. Inspired by ancient Greece, she pointed out how the Greeks didn't see freedom as freedom from something, but as the ability to act, to begin, to transform. To be free was to participate in public life, to show up, to be heard, to have a say in the world you live in. When freedom becomes private, it loses power. Arendt believed modern society lost that understanding. We pushed freedom into the private realm, and in doing so, we weakened it. It became about personal choices, consumption, and privacy. But freedom that stays silent, that never enters the world or engages with others, is, according to Arendt, a form of escape. It's the comfort of not getting involved, the safety of not being seen, the avoidance of responsibility. For her, action is the highest form of human expression. More than work or productivity, to act means to step into the world and make something happen. Something new, unpredictable, irreversible. And that can only happen with others. You can't act in a vacuum. Freedom needs plurality, conversation, risk. Freedom is action, not a guarantee. Freedom isn't guaranteed by laws or ideologies or promises of the future. It's only real when it shows up as action, a movement, a gesture, a choice made out loud. As Arendt put it, freedom is what only begins when someone is willing to act. And acting isn't just protesting or engaging in activism. It can also mean starting something, building something new, stepping forward in any way that matters. Freedom is the power to begin something that didn't exist before, and to own what comes next. The banal evil of not acting. Arendt is perhaps best known for covering the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a key figure behind the Holocaust. Surprisingly, she didn't describe him as a monster. She described him as ordinary, a man who followed orders, who didn't question. She called it the banality of evil. Evil not as something extreme, but as something that thrives through passivity, blind obedience, and the refusal to think. And this connects directly to her view of freedom. Because for Arendt, what's at stake isn't just the right to act, but the duty not to disappear. People who avoid public life, who hide behind "it's not my problem," actually support the status quo, even if they never lift a finger. To harm anyone Their silence helps oppressive systems survive. Freedom is not comfort. Its exposure showing up publicly is risky. You might fail, be criticized, misunderstood. But that's where freedom becomes real. To Arendt, freedom is uncertain. It doesn't come with guarantees, but it comes with creativity, power, and renewal. She once said, "With the birth of each person, something absolutely new enters the world." That's what freedom really is. The chance to begin again, to interrupt the status quo, to bring something unexpected into the world. And we can only do that together in the public spaces where life is shared. So ask yourself, do you only feel free when you're alone? Or do you feel even more free when you're stepping into the world with others, making something happen? Have you ever held back from speaking up, even when you knew you could make a difference? Do you believe your freedom matters to society? Or does it end with your personal desires? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear how you see freedom in this more collective sense. And if this chapter made you think differently about participation, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes living in isolation is the purest form of freedom. Freedom is a practice. Hannah Arendt shows us that freedom isn't just a right, it's a practice, a constant exercise of responsibility to the world around us. A reminder that our existence has consequences, and that nothing changes unless someone has the courage to show up. Freedom begins the moment we leave the comfort of privacy and step into the public square, with our voices, our bodies, our ideas, even if we're scared, even without certainty, because only there does freedom truly come to life. Imagine that everything you believe yourself to be, your name, your story, your accomplishments, your fears, your body, your mind, is just a passing layer, a surface-level reflection of consciousness. Now imagine that behind all of that, there's something that was never born, will never die, and isn't a person, but is the pure, unchanging reality itself. That's the view of Advaita Vedanta, one of the deepest schools of Indian philosophy, and its most influential teacher, Shankara, offers a radical vision of freedom. True freedom, moksha, isn't doing what you want. It's realizing the you who wants was never real. The illusion of the self in Advaita. The word Advaita means non-duality, no real separation between subject and object, between the one who sees and what is seen. That sense of separation is an illusion, maya, created by a mind that doesn't yet see clearly. The self you think you are, individual, limited, separate from others and the world, is just a temporary reflection of the infinite. Consciousness, like foam on a wave. It looks separate, but it's made of the same ocean. And it's this mistaken identity with a separate self that keeps us stuck. We believe we are a someone moving through time, with a beginning, middle, and end, and so we live in fear of loss, fear of death, fear of rejection. We chase desires, build defenses, wear masks, all to protect a self that was never truly separate. What is moksha? Moksha is the Sanskrit word for liberation, but this isn't political, emotional, or psychological freedom. It's ontological. It's the realization that you were never separate from the whole, that your true essence, called Atman, is identical to the Absolute, known as Brahman. Shankara put it this way: Brahman is real, the world is appearance, the individual. Self is Brahman. In other words, the world of forms is temporary, the mind creates illusions, but behind it all, there is only one reality, and freedom happens when you fully recognize that reality, not just as an idea, but as direct experience. Freedom through knowledge, not action. Shankara taught that it's not action that sets us free, it's true knowledge. You don't get there by following rituals, collecting good karma, or improving your personality. Those things have their place, but they don't dissolve the illusion of the separate self. What liberates is jnana, direct insight that the self is a fleeting reflection in the one universal consciousness. And that consciousness isn't something you have, it's what you are. This isn't belief, it's not a theory. It's a deep, quiet, inner experience, a moment where the sense of being a separate me begins to melt away like fog in the morning sun. And when that illusion fades, suffering disappears too, because suffering comes from separation, the belief that there's a you who must protect, succeed, or be validated. When that illusion collapses, what's left is peace, clarity, unity, unshakable love, living without being attached to someone. Moksha doesn't mean you vanish or stop living. Your body's still here, your mind still works, relationships still exist. But now you see them all as part of a dance, a play of the one. You keep living, loving, creating. But you're no longer clinging to the idea of being a fixed someone. You act without attachment. You feel without clinging. You go through pain, but you're no longer defined by it. That's freedom. It's not hype. It's not power. It's not living your dream. It's the end of the illusion that there was ever a you separate from the whole experience. It's gently dissolving back into the ocean of pure consciousness. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where you felt like you weren't someone, but just presence, silence, awareness? Do you believe the deepest freedom is becoming more you, or maybe becoming less you? The message of Advaita Vedanta is both simple and profound. You don't have to become anything. You just have to remember what you've always been, and when that remembering happens, fear vanishes, because separation vanishes. There's no self left that needs to defend or be defended. Freedom is total, because there's no one left to be trapped. Have you ever felt like you didn't really know what you wanted? Or maybe you wanted something so badly, and once you got it, it didn't feel the way you thought it would. Or maybe you've noticed how a lot of what you want seems to be what everyone else wants too. According to French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, these confusing experiences are actually the core of what human desire is, and his most powerful idea might be this: desire is never fully ours. It's always the desire of the other. But what does that mean? Desire doesn't come from within. Unlike the romantic or existential idea that desire comes from deep within us, from our true self, our authentic will, Lacan takes it in a completely different direction. We desire what the other teaches us to desire, and that other, with a capital O, isn't just one person. It's everything that shapes us: language, culture, media, relationships, social expectations, the world we were born into. Before we even know who we are, we've already been shaped by how others see us. Before we speak a single word, we've been spoken about, labeled, expected to be a certain way, and this creates a gap in us, a lack, a deep sense of something missing. Lacan says, desire is born from lack. So what are we lacking? We're missing the impossible. That place where we would feel fully seen, fully accepted, fully complete. But that place doesn't exist. From early on, we want to be loved, noticed, desired by the other. We want to be good enough, attractive enough, successful enough. So we start to shape our desires, often without realizing it, around what others value. You want that perfect body, maybe because you learned that's what makes you worthy of attention. You want professional success, maybe because that's how you were taught people earn respect. You want freedom, maybe because freedom was sold to you as a brand, a lifestyle, a product. In other words, we desire what the other desires, and that's why Lacan says, desire is the desire of the other. That doesn't mean we're puppets, but it does mean our desires are formed within systems that go way beyond us. Is freedom possible? Here's the hard part. If our desires are always tied to the desires of others, is freedom even possible? Can we ever want something truly authentically, freely, independently. For Lacan, true freedom in desire is rare, almost impossible, but not completely out of reach. The answer isn't to stop desiring. That would go against human nature. Instead, we have to become aware of how our desires are formed. We have to start noticing that our goals, dreams, and passions might not be fully ours, but echoes of what we've been taught to want. And with that awareness, something opens up. A small crack in the system, a space where we can begin to play with desire, laugh at it, question it, reshape it, not to be totally free, but to no longer be completely controlled by it. We are shaped by language. Lacan says we are subjects of the signifier, beings shaped by language. And language is full of gaps, contradictions, shifting meanings. When we say, "I am," we're already trying to pin down something that can't fully be named. Identity is never fixed, and desire is always slipping away. When we think we finally got what we wanted, desire has already moved on. That's the chase. That's the ache. That's human. The object A. What we can't quite reach. Lacan calls this unreachable thing the object A, the object cause of desire. It's not a real object. It's more like a black hole, a missing piece that keeps pulling us forward, but can never be filled. So desire is endless, and freedom in the face of that desire is incredibly rare. So what do we do with desire? Lacan doesn't ask us to destroy our desire. He asks us to take responsibility for it, to realize it isn't pure, it isn't authentic, it isn't innocent, but it also isn't the enemy. Desire, even if shaped by the other, is what drives us. It pushes us to create, to love, to grow, to imagine new worlds. It leaves us wanting, but also keeps us alive. Freedom isn't rejecting desire. It's learning how to live with it consciously. It's not blindly obeying it, and not running from it either. It's holding desire gently, like a flame, and choosing how to move with it. And you? Have you ever chased something intensely, only to realize it wasn't really your desire? Do you feel like your desires are truly yours? Or just reactions to what others expect? What would it look like to desire with more clarity, more intention, more curiosity? Lacan reminds us that freedom isn't getting what you want, it's knowing why you want it. And in that question, a new kind of freedom begins, less reactive, more mindful, less possessed, more awake. Sociologist and philosopher Zygmunt Bauman believed we live in liquid times. Nothing feels solid anymore. Not relationships, not jobs, not truth, not even identity. Everything slips through our fingers. And freedom, which for centuries was seen as something to fight for, has turned into something anxious and exhausting. The promise was clear: be free, choose, reinvent yourself, consume, become. But what was supposed to feel empowering has become a burden, because now freedom feels like an obligation. From citizen to consumer in the past, fighting for freedom meant resisting oppression. Today, it looks like picking from a menu of lifestyle choices. Bauman pointed out how modern society replaced the citizen with the consumer, and the consumer is free as long as they can choose what to wear, what to eat, who to date, what to believe, where to work, how to look. But this freedom isn't neutral. It's packed with pressure and hidden rules. You can be whoever you want, as long as you're desirable, productive, relevant, and marketable. You can reinvent yourself, but never stop reinventing. You can consume, but never be satisfied, because if you stop, you disappear. Identity as a never-ending project. Bauman argued that in liquid modernity, we no longer have an identity. We're expected to build one, not once, constantly. You must always be updating, improving, transforming. And at first, that looks like freedom. But in practice, it's a disguised prison. You can't just be, you have to perform. It's not enough to exist. You have to prove yourself, sell yourself, stay visible, stay ahead. This constant performance leads to burnout, comparison, and fear of being left behind. Liquid freedom becomes solid anxiety. Disposable relationships, shallow bonds. This logic doesn't stop at careers or lifestyle. It hits our relationships too. Bauman's idea of liquid love describes how, in this age of so-called freedom, bonds have become fragile, unstable, and surface level. People want connection, but fear depth. They want love, but fear losing independence. They want intimacy, but not commitment. So what happens? Relationships become disposable. People stay together only while it's easy. The moment things get uncomfortable, they leave. And this is sold to us as freedom. You don't have to put up with anything. You can leave whenever you want. You have the right to change your mind anytime. Yes, but that kind of unlimited freedom comes at a cost. The inability to build anything deep, stable, or meaningful. Because depth takes time. It takes sticking around. It takes staying, even when it's not perfect. Everything becomes a product. Bauman also noticed how consumption has spread to every part of life. We don't just consume products anymore. We consume lifestyles, identities, ideas, experiences, even causes. You shop to feel like someone. You post to prove who you are. You adopt opinions to feel like you belong. But it's all so unstable. The market keeps changing. And to keep up, you have to keep changing too. So now, the freedom to consume turns into the duty to consume. And instead of becoming more free, we become more fragmented. We turn into collages of trends, versions of ourselves. And you? Have you ever felt pressure to be someone online, even when you weren't sure who you were? Have you ever wanted something just because everyone else seemed to want it? Have you ever felt like your ability to choose felt more like a burden than a blessing? Bauman isn't hopeless. He's not saying everything's doomed, but he does issue a warning. In a liquid world, what we need most are anchors. Anchors, what holds you in place, not external control, but internal grounding. Real connections, deep commitments, values that can survive the constant dissolving of everything else. Freedom, then, isn't chasing every impulse. It's knowing what anchors you, even when the world around you is unstable. It's the ability to say no to excess, to choose stillness, to stay with something, even when it takes time. Redefining freedom. In the end, Bauman invites us to redefine what freedom means, not as infinite autonomy, but as critical awareness. The power to resist being pulled in a million directions. The strength to choose not out of fear or fashion, but out of meaning. True freedom in a liquid world isn't doing everything you can. It's knowing what really matters and staying loyal to it, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, even when the current tries to carry you away. We usually think of freedom as something abstract, an idea, a rational choice, a mental concept floating above reality. But for French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, that's an illusion. To him, real freedom isn't an idea, it's something you live through your body. And your body has limits, a history, a weight, a presence in time and space. In other words, freedom exists, but never in an absolute way. It's always situated. It's always in context, in flesh, in the world. We're not minds detached from reality. Merleau-Ponty didn't see the body as just something we have. He saw it as the very way we are in the world. We're not pure minds looking out from a distance. We are embodied awareness. We feel, think, choose, love, and suffer through our bodies. Everything we do, from deciding and hesitating to creating and connecting, happens through a body that exists in a specific time and place. That's why talking about freedom without talking about the body is like ignoring the ground beneath your feet. You might have endless dreams and desires, but they all pass through a body with a story, with social markings, with gender, color, health, or illness. A body that is seen, judged, accepted, or rejected. Freedom is not abstract. It's embodied, unlike philosophers who imagined freedom as some kind of pure, ideal state above the world. Merleau-Ponty brings us back to concrete reality. Are you free? Yes. But you're free as a body in the world, and the world has rules, structures, expectations. You act, but you don't act in a vacuum. You move in a space filled with meanings, norms, and other people's gazes. You act with a body full of habits, memories, traumas, and inherited stories. It's like dancing in a crowded room. You can move, yes, but you have to know where the obstacles are. Ignoring that isn't freedom, it's disconnection. What is situated freedom? When Merleau-Ponty talks about situated freedom, he's saying that we are free within the conditions that shape us. There's no neutral place to act from. There's no blank slate. Every decision we make comes from a specific position in life. So freedom isn't about doing anything. It's about knowing where you stand and acting with awareness from that place. That's not limitation. That's depth. Instead of chasing some fantasy of total freedom, we embrace a real, grounded freedom, one that lives in our day-to-day experiences. You didn't choose where you started. You didn't choose where you were born, your language, your family, your body, your class, your culture. But now that you're here, what do you do with it? That's the heart of situated freedom. It's not about total control. It's about real responsibility for the life you actually have. Modern life says you can be anything. Our culture celebrates limitless freedom. Be whoever you want. You can do anything. You just have to want it. But in real life, that becomes overwhelming. Because we know we're not blank slates. We have real limitations. We carry fears, trauma, illness, pressure, systemic inequality. Merleau-Ponty doesn't deny any of that, but he also doesn't reduce us to it. For him, the body is a condition, but not a prison. We can shift our habits, reshape our perceptions, reinvent our way of being, but always starting from where we are. Real freedom lives in the smallest movements, and that's beautiful, because it gives dignity to the process. It means every small choice, every act of awareness, every little change matters. Freedom isn't found in big theories. It's found in the quiet moment when you do something different, when you break a pattern, when you refuse to repeat the past. It's not magic. It's slow, embodied, real. Have you felt this? Have you ever wanted to change something in yourself, but ran into the limits of your body, your mind, or your surroundings? Have you ever felt something shift, even just a little, in a difficult moment, and knew that was the start of something new? Do you see that freedom doesn't have to be unlimited to be real? The body is where freedom happens. For Merleau-Ponty, the body isn't the thing holding you back. It's the medium through which freedom happens. It's the ground of awareness, the bridge between you and the world. He once said, "The body is our way of being in the world." That means freedom isn't escaping your human condition. It's inhabiting it fully, with presence, with openness, with truth. Freedom isn't beyond the body. It moves through it. And only when we make peace with that can we finally move with honesty, with grace, and with real freedom. We live in an era of identity freedom. People talk more than ever about being yourself, living your truth, and owning your identity. But what if the version of you that you believe in is actually something learned, something shaped by invisible forces around you? That's what American philosopher Judith Butler explores with her theory of performativity. It's a bold idea, and surprisingly liberating. Identity, including gender, isn't something we have. It's something we do, and we do it within norms that existed long before we did. Butler argues that identity isn't a fixed essence. There's no such thing as a man or woman by nature. These categories are social and linguistic constructs we start learning at birth or even before. Think about it. When a baby is born, the first question is usually, is it a boy or a girl? From that moment on, a whole set of expectations kicks in about how that child should act, speak, dress, feel, and move through the world. Gender is performed, not inherent. Throughout life, we repeat actions, gestures, and roles, not necessarily because they reflect some inner truth, but because we've learned to do them. Butler says gender is a repeated performance over time. It's not something deep inside you. It's something you enact, often without realizing it. And that performance isn't fake. It's lived, it's real, it's meaningful, but it's also regulated. She's not saying we can just pick any identity like picking an outfit. There's no identity outside of norms. Everything we express happens within systems of meaning that tell us what's acceptable, desirable, and normal. Society offers molds. This is masculine. This is feminine. This is okay. That's weird. This is respectable. That's ridiculous. These norms don't just restrict us, they produce us. They shape our bodies, desires, and ways of being. They define what we're even allowed to become. Freedom doesn't mean escaping norms. Even when we think we're being completely authentic, we're often performing on a stage with rules we didn't create and can't always see. Butler's genius is in showing that freedom isn't the absence of norms, because that's not possible. We're all born into language, culture, and systems of meaning, but that doesn't mean we're stuck. Once we realize identity is a performance, within norms we can start bending those norms, playing with them, questioning them, pushing their limits. Freedom shows up not in escaping the system, but in reworking it from within. We see this every time someone lives in a way that breaks the mold. When someone claims a once unthinkable identity, when someone lives in between categories, or when someone refuses to shrink into what society says they should be. Real freedom is subversive and collective. This kind of freedom isn't easy. It's messy. It can hurt. But it's where real change begins. Because when someone breaks a rule and refuses to disappear, they're not just being free for themselves. They're opening space for others to exist too. Freedom, then, isn't just an individual right. It's a collective act that stretches the boundaries of what's possible. For Butler, gender isn't a natural fact. It's a field of power, a system that controls who gets to be seen, heard, loved, and considered human. That's why she puts so much emphasis on recognition. Being free isn't just about expressing yourself. It's about being recognized as someone who has the right to exist that way. From philosophy to politics, the personal is political, because when gender norms go unquestioned, they exclude, silence, and harm. They say things like, "You can't be that. That's not real. You don't belong." And words like that can destroy lives, literally. Freedom means constantly fighting to expand what's possible, to make the invisible visible, to give voice to what's been kept quiet. What about you? Have you ever felt like you had to act a certain way just to be accepted? Have you ever held back from expressing something, afraid it would be too much or not normal? Do you see your identity as something you were born with, or something shaped and performed over time? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear how these ideas connect with your own story. And if this chapter gave you something to think about, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who thinks freedom is just about being yourself, without realizing how much of that self is already shaped by the world around them. Judith Butler reminds us, freedom isn't discovering your true self. It's building space for yourself to exist, not in isolation, but out loud, in motion, in resistance, and in community. When we think of freedom, we often picture rebellion, challenging the system, breaking patterns, saying no to rules. In modern Western thought, freedom is usually linked to individual autonomy, to tearing down structures. But the Chinese philosopher Confucius, who lived over 2,500 years ago, offers a completely different view. Real freedom doesn't come from rejecting the system. It comes from living with virtue within it. In other words, you're not free just because you do whatever you want. You're free when you fully embody who you are, in the role you're in, with wisdom and integrity. Freedom. Through virtue, to Confucius, the world is guided by a moral order, an invisible web of relationships where everything is connected. Every person has a place in that web. Parent, child, leader, citizen, teacher, student. These roles aren't prisons, they're pathways to human growth. The key is how you live them, not through blind obedience or rigid hierarchy, but through virtue. That means aligning your actions with principles like Ren, humanity and kindness, Li, respect and ritual, Yi, justice and righteousness. In this view, freedom is living in harmony with the Tao, the way, fulfilling your role with clarity, care, and character. Freedom is maturity, not ego Confucius. Believe that real freedom comes from moral growth, and virtue isn't some lofty ideal. It shows up in everyday acts. How you speak to elders, how you respond to authority, how you care for family, how you contribute to your community. When you live with virtue, you're not being controlled. You're expressing your best self. You're not just a piece in the system, you're a bridge between heaven and earth. A living example of balance and wisdom. Confucius didn't idolize the individual who does whatever they want. He admired the Zhuangzi, the honorable person who acts with humility, respect, and awareness of their place in the world. And paradoxically, that's what brings true freedom. Freedom isn't escaping. It's embodying. Confucius knew that personal desires often clash with social expectations, but for him, that wasn't oppression. It was an opportunity for growth. He taught that a wise person doesn't live just to satisfy impulses, but to refine themselves, to be worthy of others' trust. This might sound rigid at first, but Confucius didn't say we should blindly obey unfair systems. In fact, if a ruler is unjust, they lose the right to lead. If a tradition is cruel, it should be reformed by people guided by virtue. The order isn't static. It's something to be shaped, improved, and protected by those who live with integrity. Ritual as grounded freedom. In Confucian thought, ritual, matters. Not because rituals are rules, but because they create symbolic order. They help us remember who we are and where we belong. Sound conservative? Maybe. But in a world that feels chaotic and uncertain, rituals, roles, and commitments can bring us peace. When done with heart and presence, rituals aren't empty. They become meaningful acts of embodied freedom. You're not trapped by the role. You're filling it with soul, with virtue, with beauty. Questions for you. Have you ever felt that fulfilling a role? Like taking care of someone, mentoring, guiding, or protecting, gave you a deeper sense of purpose than simply chasing personal desires? Have you ever felt free, not by escaping responsibility, but by embracing it with honor? Do you believe freedom can be found within relationships, not just on the edge of individualism? Confucius didn't preach rigidity, he preached harmony. He wasn't about blind submission. He was about aligning your life with virtue. For him, freedom isn't the opposite of order. It's what gives order its soul. Chaos isn't freedom. Disorder isn't courage. Acting without care isn't authenticity. It's immaturity. True freedom, in Confucius's eyes, is the fruit of inner wisdom. It's knowing you have a place in the world and realizing that this place doesn't limit you, it reveals you. We live surrounded by rules, laws, customs, political systems, institutions, and often those rules seem like they just appeared, like they're part of nature, unchangeable, eternal. But philosopher and psychoanalyst Cornelius Castoriadis offers a powerful reminder. Those rules didn't fall from the sky. They weren't made by gods. They didn't come from the earth. We, human beings, made them. And the most tragic part, we forgot that we did. That forgetting, he says, is alienation. Alienation from our own power, from our radical freedom, from our ability to reinvent the world. Society as an imaginary creation, one of Castoriadis's core ideas is this. Every society is, at its core, an imaginary creation. That doesn't mean it's fake. It means everything we take as normal, laws, social roles, institutions, beliefs, was imagined and built by people. We created laws, we created governments, we created money, education, religion, language. But then we forgot we made them. We start to treat them as if they've always existed, as if they're just the way things are. That's how society operates. It creates itself, then pretends it didn't, as if all these rules and structures were handed down by some higher force. That's where heteronomy begins, living under rules we believe came from outside us, when in fact, we made them. Freedom as collective autonomy for Castoriadis. Real freedom begins when we remember that society is self-creating. When we realize we are the authors of the rules we follow, that changes everything. It means we can question existing systems. Nothing is too sacred or too old to be reimagined. Real democracy isn't choosing between pre-approved options, it's participating in creating the rules of the game. Freedom, then, isn't just personal. It's collective, creative, and radical. It's the power to imagine and build new ways of living. Alienation, forgetting. Our own power, alienation, for Castoriadis, isn't just psychological or economic. It's existential. It happens when we forget that everything around us was made by human hands. It's when we hear ourselves say, "That's just how it is. It's always been this way." We can't change that. This passivity keeps unjust systems alive, not because they're too strong, but because we've come to believe they're natural. When we treat the world as unchangeable, we give up the power to transform it. But Castoriadis reminds us, the human world is always a creation, and if it was created, it can be recreated. A society that forgot how to create. We live in a time where everything is managed, optimized, measured, but very little is truly created. Democracies have become technical bureaucracies. Politics feels like marketing. Education becomes job training. Culture becomes entertainment. In this landscape, our collective imagination is asleep. We settle for what's possible and forget to dream about what's impossible. But Castoriadis believed our greatest human strength is our creative imagination. The one who imagines, questions. The one who questions, transforms. The one who transforms, creates freedom. Questions that matter. Have you ever felt like you're living under rules no one questions, even though they seem outdated, unfair, or just plain wrong? Have you ever felt like the world wasn't made for you? And maybe it could be made differently. Do you believe that society can reinvent itself? Or do you feel like we're stuck with what we've got? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how this idea of self-institution hits you. And if this chapter sparked something in you, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes things are just the way they are, not realizing they were made by people and can be remade. Democracy, as creation, not just selection. Castoriadis had strong critiques of modern democracy. To him, voting every few years isn't enough. Real democracy means creating the laws, institutions, and values we live by. It's realizing that the state, the school system, the media, the market aren't distant forces. They're extensions of our shared imagination. If we don't like what we see, it's not enough to complain. We have to imagine again. freedom as a creative act. Freedom, in this view, isn't just a personal right. It's a creative responsibility. It starts with a question: what if things were different? What if they didn't have to be this way? What if we designed a new way to live together? That question is the beginning of every revolution. We are the creators of our world. Castoriadis calls us to leave behind the role of obedient consumers and step into the role of conscious creators of our shared reality. This takes imagination, risk responsibility, but it also gives us something rare: a deep sense of belonging and the realization that we can shape the world around us. There's no true freedom where rules are seen as untouchable, but there's endless potential in remembering that all rules are human and can be changed. Most of us believe we're free to choose. We think we act out of our own will, that we decide things because we want to, that we think because we choose to think. But psychologist and behaviorist B.F. Skinner offered a deeply uncomfortable idea. Free will is an illusion, and one of the most dangerous. More than just a philosophical critique, Skinner saw free will as a practical obstacle, something that prevents real change, effective reforms, and deep transformations in human behavior. 2. Him. As long as we keep believing that people act purely out of internal desire or will, we'll keep ignoring the real forces that shape our behavior: the environment, external stimuli, and consequences. The human being as a product of the environment. Skinner was one of the main figures in radical behaviorism, a school of psychology that claims human behavior isn't caused by inner intentions, but by external conditioning. He developed the concept of reinforcement. Everything we do is a learned response to environmental triggers. If a behavior is rewarded, it's likely to be repeated. If it's punished or ignored, it tends to disappear. This applies to everything: how we speak, how we dress, how we love, how we work, how we respond to compliments or criticism. According to Skinner, the feeling of freedom we experience is just the result of a system of reinforcement so well established that it gives us the illusion of choice. But deep down, our actions are predictable if you understand the environment that shaped them. The fiction of the self that chooses. The idea of free will makes us believe there's a command center inside of us, a kind of pure self that looks at options and makes rational, independent decisions. But for Skinner, this is a cultural myth. We invented this story to feel morally responsible, superior, or spiritually enlightened. The problem is, this belief gets in the way, because if we think people act just because they wanted to, we ignore the deeper question: what made them want that in the first place? And when we ignore that, we start blaming individuals and stop analyzing the system. A child who misbehaves at school is called a problem, instead of asking why school feels irrelevant to them. A criminal is labeled as evil instead of investigating the violent, excluded environment they came from. Failure is treated as personal weakness instead of a sign that the system failed to offer equal opportunities. Believing in individual free will keeps us from seeing the bigger picture. Freedom as a trap. Skinner went further. He said that the belief in freedom is what actually keeps us trapped. As long as we think the problem is inside the person, we'll ignore how powerful the environment is in shaping behavior. This has massive implications for politics, education, and society. If we want a more just, peaceful, ethical world, we need to reform the environments people live in, not just moralize their behavior. For Skinner, the key is to create systems of reinforcement that encourage positive, pro-social behavior. But that means giving up the idea that every behavior is the result of a free personal choice. To change the world, we need to stop just looking inward and start looking outward. The ethics of conditioning. A lot of people criticize Skinner's view, but doesn't this strip humans of dignity? What about creativity, art, love? Skinner's answer: he's not denying any of that. Creativity, compassion, critical thinking, All of it can still exist, but they're not mysterious gifts. They're responses that can be encouraged by the right environment. His main point is simple. If we understand behavior as a reaction to surroundings, then we can design environments that help bring out the best in humanity, and that is a kind of freedom, not magical, but real. A freedom that's built, not assumed. A freedom that comes from conditions, not just will. Have you noticed this in your own life? Have you ever thought you were totally free to choose something, and later realized social, emotional, or cultural factors were guiding you? Can you remember times when you acted on autopilot, repeating a behavior that had been reinforced over time? Do you feel your freedom depends more on your inner strength or on the opportunities and context around you? A more honest view of freedom Skinner didn't want to devalue human beings. He simply wanted us to have better tools to understand ourselves. To him, freedom isn't some invisible power. It's a real possibility that appears when we design environments that support dignity, cooperation, and creativity. As long as we keep saying, it's all about personal will, we'll keep building systems that blame the individual and ignore the causes. But when we realize we're shaped and that we can, in turn, shape the world, we go from being victims of fate to becoming architects of reality. Everyone talks about freedom. Politicians, philosophers, economists. The word freedom shows up in speeches from the left and the right, liberals and conservatives alike. But American philosopher John Rawls asked a tough question. Freedom. For who? Because according to him, freedom without social justice is just a pretty cover on top of an unequal system. It might sound like it's for everyone, but in practice, it mostly works for those who already started the race ahead. Justice as fairness rules developed one of the most influential political theories of the 20th century, justice as fairness. In his book, A Theory of Justice, he argued that social systems are only truly fair when they benefit everyone, especially the least advantaged. That doesn't mean everyone gets the exact same things, but it does mean everyone should have equal real opportunities to grow, succeed, and live with dignity. More importantly, inequalities are only acceptable if they help improve the lives of those with the least. This is the core of what Rawls calls the difference principle, the veil of ignorance. Thought experiment, Rawls invites us to imagine this. You're about to be born into a new world, but you don't know who you'll be. You might be rich or poor, healthy or sick, a man or a woman, white or black, privileged or marginalized. So now, not knowing where you'll land, what kind of society would you consider fair? Chances are you'd choose one where, no matter who you are, you'd still have dignity, access, and opportunity. You'd choose a fair society. This is Rawls' famous veil of ignorance, a mental tool that helps reveal what justice truly looks like, a system that protects everyone, especially those at the bottom. Formal versus real freedom. Rawls' biggest critique is this: formal freedom isn't enough. Saying, everyone is free to go to school, get a job, or start a business sounds fair. But what if not everyone actually can? A kid growing up in a poor neighborhood with underfunded schools, no safety, and little food might be free on paper. But that freedom is empty. The doors are closed before they even reach them. Meanwhile, a child born into a wealthy, well-connected family has real freedom, with support systems, access, and open pathways. Rawls makes us face what many ignore. Freedom without social justice isn't freedom, it's privilege in disguise. It protects those on top while leaving everyone else fighting giants with plastic swords. Freedom requires redistribution. Rawls wasn't a radical. He didn't want to destroy private property or enforce total equality. But he was clear. If an economic system creates wealth, that wealth must be shared in a way that lifts up those with less. The freedom to build a business is great, but only if it also brings social benefit. Otherwise, it's just selfish freedom, building walls instead of bridges, Real justice, according to Rawls, isn't charity. It's structure. It's a system built so no one is left behind because of where they were born. If you work hard, you'll succeed. Really, how many times have you heard, if you want it, you can make it? You just have to work hard. But is that really true for everyone? Do we all start from the same place? Leave a comment. I'd love to hear your experience. And if this chapter made you rethink what freedom and justice mean, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who thinks merit is all that matters, even when the playing field is tilted. Freedom as a collective effort for Rawls. Freedom isn't just a personal trait. It's a shared project, something that must be protected legally, structurally, and ethically. He believed a fair society doesn't have to choose between freedom and equality. In fact, true freedom exists when your success doesn't depend on someone else's misery. And we only get there if we're willing to rebuild the system, not just hand out scraps. Freedom that ignores others is just inequality. In the end, Rawls. Message is clear and still powerful today. No one is free unless there is justice. No one is truly free if someone else is still trapped in a system that calls inequality merit. Real freedom doesn't exclude. It doesn't dress up privilege as personal achievement. It doesn't blame people for failing in a rigged game. It lifts, it opens doors, and it invites everyone to the table. We end this journey through disturbing ideas about freedom with a teacher who reminds us to pause, to breathe, to be. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen monk and one of the most influential Buddhist voices in the West, didn't talk about freedom as a lofty, abstract idea. He talked about it as a living practice, something you experience in the here and now. For him, true freedom isn't about getting more. It's about letting go of what's holding us back. And more often than not, what holds us back is our own mind. A restless mind is already trapped. We live like we're constantly chasing something: freedom, success, love, recognition, growth, peace, always reaching, always running. But Thich Nhat Hanh asks us to consider, are you truly free if your mind is always on the run? He teaches that we're not free when we're stuck in the past or anxious about the future, when we're driven by desires, fears, expectations, or regrets. We're in an invisible prison built inside our own minds. And in that state, even the search for freedom becomes a trap. Because real freedom doesn't come from the next thing we get. It comes from the quality of our presence. Freedom through mindfulness. In Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, mindfulness is the key, but not as a productivity hack or trendy wellness tool. Mindfulness for him is about fully showing up for life. When we eat, we eat. When we walk, we walk. When we listen, we truly listen, not just wait to reply. This kind of radical simplicity brings us back to something we've forgotten. Life only ever happens right now. The past is memory. The future is imagination. The present is all we truly have. And it's where freedom lives. When we're fully present, there's no rush, no judgment, no clinging. There's just the moment. And in that, nothing is missing. Letting go, not gaining more. Thich Nhat Hanh flips the modern idea of freedom on its head. Freedom isn't something we win. It's something we allow. It's not out there. It's wherever we're fully present. Most philosophies chase freedom as a breakthrough, a conquest, or a personal transformation. But Zen teaches us that freedom comes from letting go of attachment, anger, resistance, and control. Imagine this. You don't have to run away. You don't have to achieve anything. You just have to be here, open, accepting, aware. And when you are, even for a breath, you realize there's nowhere else to go. You've already arrived. The daily practice of freedom, Thich Nhat Hanh, said freedom begins with one mindful breath. A breath where you simply know, I'm breathing, I'm alive, I'm here. Sounds simple, right? But that's why we overlook it. Our modern minds crave the complex, the dramatic, the spectacular, but real freedom is in the details. Drinking tea with presence, walking without rushing, listening with your heart open, breathing and knowing, this is enough. This practice doesn't ignore the world's problems. It prepares us to face them with clarity, with compassion, with steadiness. Because when you're present, you don't react with anger. You respond with understanding. You don't act from impulse. You act from wisdom. And that, according to Thich Nhat Hanh, is the root of all true freedom. Freedom in silence. He also taught the value of silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of inner stillness, space where you don't have to prove anything, defend anything, win anything. In that silence, freedom isn't something you declare, it's something you live. It's the moment you stop fighting against life and finally start being in it. He once said, "The miracle is not walking on water. The miracle is walking on earth, fully aware of each step." And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. To be free is to be fully present in each step, each breath, each connection. The freedom we chase in books, movements, and goals, it's already here, just waiting for us to pay attention. If this journey through some of the most thought-provoking ideas about freedom made you reflect, rethink, or even feel a little productively uncomfortable, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video. It really helps spread the message. Share it with someone you know needs to hear this. And if you want to keep exploring deep, soulful topics like this, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because here, philosophy isn't just distant theory, it's a way of living. Freedom starts in the mind, but it only blossoms when we bring it into the world. See you in the next video. Peace, presence, and deep thought.